Welcome to Wraith Sport Fishing Podcast. We're very, very happy to have Nick Haddad from the IGFA joining us today. I think it's going to be an exciting discussion. First in a series, we look forward to going through a lot of what the IGFA offers. I myself was really surprised at the incredible number of programs that the IGFA offers, how widespread its availability to anybody who fishes anywhere in the world.
Great, thanks for having me on here. I'm happy to come on, and thanks for the invitation. There's a lot of great things we can go over here, and yeah, the IGFA does a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't know about. So I think it's good to get this information out there, and get the everyday angler involved.
And I want to start, if I can, with you, Nick. Your background. You come from the northeastern United States and make your way down to the IGFA. How does that happen?
So, I always grew up fishing. My dad taught me how to fish, but I wouldn't call him a fisherman like I am. He'll go out casually, but I've been obsessed since a very young age. It kind of became my escape, getting to a stream, trout fishing. It's just so peaceful, whether you catch something or not. You're always learning something new when you're on the water. And, I was going to do engineering. My dad's an engineer. I was always good at math and science. And my mom was like, oh, you should do marine science. I'm like, I don't know, like not as many jobs, tough field. But she convinced me. So I ended up going to University of Tampa, where I got my major in biology and marine science. And then from there, again, didn't have anything lined up, and I just happened to fall into a perfect gig at Louisiana State University, where I got my master's in renewable natural resources, concentrated in fisheries and aquaculture management. So for most of the 6 years I've been down in the South, I've been studying fish specifically and doing research on them as well.
Which gives you a unique advantage when you're fishing.
It does. You think it would, but you always learn something new every time you go fishing. Right when you think you have a fish figured out, something new comes up.
Absolutely.
When I graduated from there, I just finished my thesis, and I actually just found the job on Indeed, applied, and it ended up working out.
Nick, tell us some about the history of the IGFA. It's been around, as far as I know, my entire life.
Yep. 1939, at the eve of World War II, it was founded by Michael Lerner, and it was created basically because we had a need for a standardized set of rules across the sports and a code of ethics for sport fishing in general. So it was created back in 1939. Michael Lerner actually was not the first president, but William Gregory was, who was an ichthyologist at the American Museum of Natural History. So it's, we have our roots in conservation and science. Back in 1945, I believe it was, in one of our first newsletters, our mission was to to engage recreational anglers and accumulate data and collect data to study fish. So it's always been about studying fish. The biggest fish in the world, it helps us determine growth rates, max sizes of species. So a lot of all tackle records are actually used for science. And we haven't always been a nonprofit. We were actually, before that, we didn't have memberships open to the public. We had member institutions, and they were almost all scientific institutions. So, our roots are in science and conservation, and that's kind of where we began. We have here in the office still, although the Hall of Fame moved to Missouri, we still have the largest collection of books and magazines on recreational angling in the world. It's pretty incredible, the E.K. Harry Library of Fishes, and we've done a lot in the past for conservation, and it's just a part of the IGFA that a lot of people don't know about.
Fantastic. And as well, the IGFA is a leader in conservation, involved in lots of programs.
Yep.
Vegetation and otherwise. Should give us a little bit on that.
So probably our feature conservation program is the IGMR Great Marlin Race. And it's the world's largest satellite tagging program for billfish. And it's basically like a tournament within a tournament. So anglers or boats or clubs can sponsor a satellite tag, and they'll be deployed in these tournaments. Like one of the major billfish tournaments around the world, we have select deployment locations. and it's almost like a tournament within the tournament. So people will deploy the tags, and whoever's marlin travels the furthest over 242 days wins that tournament. So it's almost like a race to track the marlin, and it collects data on, light, environmental variables, and has been huge for the way we study billfish today. So we have these tracks, we can actually follow them for up to 240 days around the world as they migrate. And it's a pretty incredible program. But on top of that, you have your big fish. You also have your bait fish, which are equally as important. So we have our Forage Fish Conservation Program, where we fund graduate students who are studying bait fish specifically. That's another program. And on top of that, we're always promoting science-based fisheries policy that's, good for the fish and recreational anglers. Has to be science-based. One of our major wins was the Billfish Conservation Act of 2012, which we were a huge proponent in pushing, and that prevented in the U.S. mainland the import of billfish meat and what from the Pacific. And what we did some market research and found that the U.S. was actually the world's leader in importing billfish. So we got that law passed, and it's been huge. It was amended in 2018 because there was a loophole. It was only for the mainland, and there's still some imports coming from Hawaii. But in 2018, that was amended to close that loophole as well.
Fantastic. Incredible. I mean, and this is all part of what we need to preserve our fisheries.
Yep. And the
ourselves and future generations.
Well, yeah, the future generations, education is another huge thing we do. Just 2 years ago, we started the concept of this Passports to Fishing clinic. So it's basically everything you need to teach kids or the next generation of anglers how to responsibly fish, including environmental stewardship, conservation, knot tying, the basics of tackle. And we've made these kits and sent them around the world. And in less than 2 years, we've taught, that means not just gave a kid a rod, that means went through all those topics, 50,000 kids how to fish. We have those kits in 10 languages, and they're sent to 37 countries right now. So really doing our best to, teach the next generation of anglers. If I didn't fish, I probably wouldn't have gotten into science, and I'm so happy that's what led me to this. So
fantastic. And you're responsible for all of those files behind you, I assume.
Yes. So you might be able to see there's actually 3 rows of files there. In the front, we've got our line class records. In the middle, we have tippet class and junior records. And in the back, we have all tackle length records. And we actually file every Grand Slam application away, too, with the photos and stuff, too. So there's lots of stuff back there, including the line and tackle for almost all those applications.
A treasure trove of happy people.
It is. A lot of cool stories in there, too.
Yep. So one of the things we're really like to focus on is the specifics of what's required to ultimately apply for a record, whether it be today, we're going to spend some time really focusing on release length records, what's entailed there. And I think it is probably good to start at the rod butt all the way through to your terminal tackle. There are going to be some nuances and that we may not get into, but to take the mystery out of it, because it really isn't that complicated.
Yeah, no, it's not. I always tell people most of your everyday tackle is compliant. When we're talking about a rod, your everyday rod, the tip length has to be at least 40 inches. The butt length can't be more than 27 inches. But if you're surf casting, there's scenarios like that where the rule does not apply. But the rod's pretty standard. Most rods you're going to see are over 40 inches in length, and the butt length is usually less than 27, with the exception of surf casting, which it's allowed to be longer. So that's your basic rod requirement. When you get into the line and the double line and the leader, that's where you start to have a lot more of intricacies in the rules here. Up to, we got different rules for freshwater, saltwater, leader length, for lines up to and including 20 pounds, for lines 30 pounds and over. So I don't know how in depth you want me to go, but there are a lot in the rules here. I'll just give you an example for saltwater fishing, conventional tackle. Leader length, you're allowed up to a 15-foot leader if you're using a main line class up to and including 20 pounds. If it's over that, you're allowed a 30-foot leader. And a lot of that stems from, big game offshore fishing. marlin fishing, someone being able to grab the leader on some of those bigger fish.
Absolutely. And then as we get down, and I spent some time focusing on this because I've been up bottom fishing quite a bit recently, blackfish and black sea bass. The hooks.
Mm-hmm.
There are very specific requirements for the distance between a tandem hook rig or a high-low rig and
Yeah,
uh,
so if you're using, again, it's all situational stuff, but if you're using, two hooks on a single bait, they both have to be embedded in the bait, and I believe they can't be more than 18 inches apart. I mean, that's a big bait at that point. But, if you're using a dropper rig, they have to be on separate drops there with two baits. If you're using bait, dead, live, natural, you cannot use treble hooks. That's one of the big rules that we've had, and it's just something for the protection of fish. There's been a lot of evolution in fishery management and gear specifically to help protect some of our species. So yeah, you cannot use treble hooks. It's common in some fisheries like king mackerel, stinger hooks.
mhm.
So there's a couple spots where we've seen it, but most people today in today's day and age aren't using treble hooks with natural bait as much.
And
But all
a
the lures,
having a hook swing into and snagging a fish
it's not sporting really at that point. And most of the lures you see at the store, though, if you buy some plugs or hard baits with 3 treble hooks, most of those are perfectly legal. We don't allow more than 3 treble hooks. I don't know if I've seen a lure with 4. So most of what you buy is compliant. But if you're planning to fish, it's good to read through these rules. Just, they were developed for a reason to standardize the sport around the world. And everyone that fishes by these rules and all these records here, everyone's fishing by the same set of rules. So
right. And there's not a lot of mystery to it. It's not that complicated to look. Go through. It just requires you to read the rules, spend a little bit.
Yep. There's a lot into it, and but we're here to help you. So one of the biggest things I always tell people, if you're confused about a rule, if you want me to go through a section with you, I'd be happy to go through. So don't hesitate to call us. We want to help you out. We want this to be clear. There's just so many situations involved in fishing. One rule that a lot of people don't know of is if you're wade fishing or a shore-bound angler, and you have a guide with you, the guide has to actually be within a rod's length for you to net the fish. And that was a rule that came into place because we saw a couple situations where people are fishing in rivers, and the guide will be 15, 20 yards downriver scooping them up in the net. But that fight's not over yet. You didn't win the fight against that fish. It could leave the pool, it could run into some snags still. So it's all really rules to have a fair fight between the angler and the fish.
Exceptional, as it should be. Understood. From that point, you're fishing. Your rod's in the rod holder, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Fish bites. Take it from there. What do we do and what do we not do?
Oh, well, if you are fishing for record consideration, you pick up the rod yourself immediately. You do not let the mate pass it off to you. That's one of the common issues we see on, some charter boats. The mates, it's their job, to help out the angler. A lot of anglers need to be helped. But if you're fishing for record consideration and by our rules, you pick up the rod immediately once you have the bite, and then you fight it to fish entirely. No one else can touch the rod, reel, or main line until you get to the leader. The mate can grab the leader, obviously, or gaff the fish or net the fish. So yeah, that's a big one. Passing off the rod, that's a violation of our rules. And picking up the rod immediately. So let's say a fish bites, someone can't clear all the lines and then go back to the rod because the boat's fighting the fish, during that time period. So it's designed to keep a fair fight between the angler and the fish.
And that's, the timing is you should go straight to the rod, pick up the rod,
exactly.
Set the hook or
Yep.
And fight the fish. So now we're fighting the fish. Fish is coming to the boat. There's the mate or your fishing partner at that point from the leader down can touch it.
Yep, they can grab the leader.
Contact with the rod.
Yep.
Or the line.
Yep, they can. You gotta get the fish in close enough to the leader where either they can grab the leader, wrap their hand, pull it in, or they can gap it from that point. But yeah, you do have to get it to that point on your own.
Right. And for release, net the fish. Your
Yep.
partner or mate can net the fish, bring it aboard.
Yep, and for the all tackle length category, which we'll get into a little more later, obviously it mandates the release of the fish, and you cannot use gaffs. So, which seems like a no-brainer. Like you can't lip gaff a fish and then release it. So yeah, you do have no gaffs are allowed for all tackle length records.
Yep. Very good. So I have with me the IGFA measuring device. It's a unique device, and we'll get into that. They're well built, but you need to have it.
Yeah. Yes.
You're not measuring that fish snout to tail with a tape measure or anything else. This is what's required.
Yep, and that's a lot of people, have complained about it, but once I describe it, it's pretty easy to understand. Just like we have a standardized set of rules here, you need a standardized measurement. And there's many ways you can measure the length of a fish. I mean, if you run a soft tape measure from the mouth of a fish all the way down, including the length of the girth, it's going to be a longer measurement than a perfectly flat nose to the front of the board measurement to the rear center edge of the tail. So there's a lot that goes into it, especially with, the increments on the scale here in centimeters. We don't estimate in between. Certain tape measures go down to a millimeter, some a centimeter, some an inch. So there's a lot of variety, and that's why we decided that you needed to have this device to make it standardized across everything, which makes sense.
If your fish is 55.5 centimeters, you measure to 55.
Yep, because there's no in between on the measuring device, so it rounds down to the lowest set increment there.
Yep. And I've noticed there are a few records that are ties.
Yep. So
on the release, some 54 and 55.
Mm-hmm. So you have to beat a record by 2 centimeters to outright defeat it, and a tie is either the same centimeter value or one larger. And that just kind of goes back to, we have the similar rules for weight-based records. If a fish weighs 25 pounds or under, you have to beat it by 2 ounces to be an outright full-on record on your own. If you beat it by less than 2 ounces or tie it exactly, it's still considered a tie. Fish over 25 pounds, it's 1/2 of 1% of the current record. I'm going to pull out one of these, which we're actually in the production of a bunch more. You got one of the last ones for sale right now. But this is basically what the board is. You've got your centimeter increments on there. You've got a bump board on the front where you press the mouth or snout of the fish up against there. And there's actually some little descriptions and rules on the front there as well. And then it comes with a packet here which describes your all tackle length records and the rules, and you have a list of eligible species and minimums to start the category.
And that list of eligible species is not a complete list of all species. There are some species that are simply not on there, and they're not going to be. I'm not sure I would want to be the one to measure a mako shark and release it, because it needs to be brought aboard. It needs to be laid out on the. So it's just a rational decision by IGFA.
Yeah, so the category was created. I mean, I can go into history a little bit. It was created in 2011. A lot of people have been pushing for conservation. We've always been a conservation-based organization from the very beginning. I go into that more in detail too, but it was created to mandate the release of fish. There's a lot of scenarios these days, striped bass fishery, for example, where the slot limit's 28 to 35 inches in most states.
Mm-hmm.
You can't keep a record if you're on a boat and an all tackle weight. So not only does it help conservation wise, but it gives opportunity to anglers who may not be able to keep the fish or weigh it from shore per se, because that's a requirement for weight based records, with the exception of junior records. So it gives you that opportunity, and it's just a great category. And it was created in 2011, and we had all of our line class and tippet class eligible species. So what we did was we went through that and we decided, hey, we can safely measure and release on the board. So billfish, for example, you're not going to find them on that list in here, because you can't safely bring a billfish up on the boat, measure it on this device, and then release it. So we
And
basically
we have a new regulation in place that doesn't allow you to boat the fish unless you're going to kill it.
exactly.
Yeah. So the days of pictures of sailfish being held up and then released are over.
That's basically how we decided on that list. It doesn't mean there's not going to be more on it in the future, but for now, that's what the list was decided at. So they're all fish that you can safely boat, measure quickly, and release.
Yep. And there remains at least one open cat or one vacant.
Yeah, I believe there's actually a few vacants. The one that surprised me, I think weak fish is still vacant.
Yeah. Well, we're going to close that up hopefully soon. I'll be out on the water immediately.
That might catch someone's interest on here. And then
Yeah.
if you get the minimum, so we have this list here, and if we look at weak fish, the minimum is 48 centimeters. So the minimums on this were decided basically at, we had to have a starting point for where we can start the category. So these were basically around half of the all tackle length. So whatever the all tackle record was by weight, we took their length and we cut it in half to decide where the starting point for the records can be.
So any vacant species, there's a minimum length to qualify to apply for the release record.
Yep, if it's vacant, it has to reach that minimum, and it's also similar for line tippet class records. So it's just improve the quality, so people aren't submitting something like a 2-pound fish on a 130-pound line or something like that.
Exactly, there it is. So you've now captured what you think will be a record fish. You have measured it. The process there involves taking specific photographs and to provide with your application.
Yep.
Why don't you walk us through the application process and what's necessary?
So first of all, you land a fish. We have in that packet, we have best handling practices. We always advise to hold the fish horizontally if possible. We want to protect the fish, use rubber coated nets if possible. But from there, the requirements are a few pictures. You need to have a picture of the full length of the fish on the measuring board, a close-up of the mouth position so that we can see it's pressed up against the front, and a close-up of the tail so we can accurately read the fork length. It's technically the rear center edge of the tail, but for most fish, it's the fork length. Those are the required pictures on top of the angler with the fish, so your hero shot, and the rod and reel that was used. And from there, you have to cut your line sample off. So if you're fly fishing, that includes your whole leader attached to the original fly. And if you're fishing with conventional tackle, we need 5 meters or at least 16.5 feet of your main line attached to your double line, leader, and hooks. If bait fishing, if you're using a lure, you can take a picture of it and cut it off and send it in, because they're getting expensive lures these days.
Yeah, they certainly are. So not that complicated. In the day of cell phones, where we all have the ability to take pictures,
Yeah. Or
it's
video quickly. I mean, I'm seeing a lot now where someone will take a video showing the full length and just quickly zoom into the mouth, run it along to the tail position, and we can tell from the full length where it should be. We can zoom in on the tail, see it at the same position. So it's really quick. I mean, you can do all that, the picture of the angler, your hero shot, and what's required on the device in less than a minute, and get the fish back in the water. You can take the picture of the rod and reel after, and you can get your line sample after. So the fish doesn't have to be out of the water for very long at all.
And you want to be sure on release that fish releases healthy, swims off, and
need to, depending on how long the fight was, and do everything you can to make sure that fish swims off as strong as possible.
Fantastic. If what would happen? Fish release, up it goes. You can't revive. That's the end of that record application.
Qualified for the record, it has to be released alive and well and swim off strong.
All right, fantastic. Now we get to the paperwork. We've got an application. I carry mine in a Ziploc bag with me when I'm fishing. Right. So walk us through that application process. Witness.
So the application is pretty straightforward. It's all information that you should be able to gather relatively quickly, especially for the all tackle length. You don't have to worry about your scale information, all the pictures are on the board, so we know that immediately. But it's basically a series of questions or fields to fill out, just describing your tackle, the length of the fish, witnesses you have. It's not impossible to catch a record without a witness. Some people think that. But if you properly document it, when I fish by myself, most of the time I have a GoPro on my chest. So I record most of my fishing, and I can certainly properly document a record, weight or length based by myself. We always suggest to include witnesses if they're on there, in case we have to reach out for more information or we need testimony from witnesses or we see something, we do ask for that information. But yeah, most of it's just, fighting time, rod make, tip length, butt length, length of fish, girth of fish, if you have it. And yeah, it's pretty much all straightforward.
Well, I myself think that this is a tremendous addition to what we all do fishing. The opportunity to catch records, anybody has that opportunity. And I think that getting away from the biggest fish that necessitates killing that fish, this is a step in the right direction. I've watched the progression over my lifetime of fishing, which is probably a little bit longer than yours, given all of this gray. So that the release didn't exist.
Yeah,
But when I started fishing, it wasn't a thing. It's become, and it's growing. And as I see more and more tournaments focusing on release, something like this is a big step forward, I think, not only to open up opportunity Greg Myerson, good friend of ours, he's got a world record. He's got the world record striped bass. That's not going to change for a while. I know that he would love to see somebody catch a bigger bass because it shows how healthy the fishery is.
The Albert McReynolds, right? He caught it from shore, so it might be possible still, but it's unlikely. So.
Yep. No, absolutely. But being able to recognize accomplishments, angling, it's great stuff. We really appreciate all the IGFA does.
Well, thank you, and it's cool to see the evolution of our mindset as fishermen. Like you said, release wasn't a thing. Now it's almost frowned upon, which I don't think that should be the case. We're recreational fishermen. We provide a lot of money towards science and funding for to figure out what's happening with our stocks. If you catch a fish, a healthy stock, it's in good shape and it's good eating, by all means, feel free to eat it. I eat fish sometimes. I'd say 99% of the time I release fish, but I'm very happy with keeping one once in a while for dinner. But it's cool though. Like I said, the mindset's changing. I ran some stats quick just before I hopped on here. So far this year in 2020 for approved records, that's all records, including weight, 51.7% were released alive. So including weight records, which is impressive. And in the last 5 years or so, we've seen that number right around 50% every year.
Which is exceptional. I mean, recently you were telling me about a junior record with the Tog.
Yep.
Fascinating. And fish was brought back in. Why don't you tell the story?
Yeah, so he brought the fish back in, which he actually didn't have to, but that's okay. A junior is actually able to weigh a fish on the boat. That's the only exception for weight-based records. Are juniors allowed to do that? Because we want them to be able to release every fish if they want to, not have to bring it in if they don't want. But he actually brought it in, got a weight on the dock, and was still able to release the fish alive and well afterwards. So very cool story.
It's just remarkable. It's fantastic.
Yep. We recently saw 3 tarpon records caught and released on the fly as well. And
really?
Yes, so I spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time on the phone with FWC, making sure the angler was compliant with all the rules. So in Florida, you're not allowed to take a fish out of the water if it's over 40 inches. Didn't specify total length or fork length, but from what I heard, it was fork length. So there was a couple lighter women's tippet class records, and she was able to set the 2-pound, 4-pound. Both of them were under 40 inches, so she was legally allowed to weigh it where she caught it, not transport it, weigh it where she caught it, it like wading in the water or standing on the shore. and release it. And then for the third one, it was over the 6-pound record, 6-pound tippet record. It was over, but she was able to apply her tarpon tag, which is a requirement for the rules if it's over 40 inches fork length, and then cut off the tag and release it safely. So
Great story. Fantastic. You've got a lot of files behind you.
I do.
I'd love to see one. Take us through it. You know, if you have something there.
I actually pulled a couple for you because this is one that sparked interest. So this was the all tackle length striped bass from this past year.
Fantastic.
So yeah, so this is it. And basically what I said before is you got your hero shot there, almost the same image, just two slightly different. So for this one, we have a picture of the full length on the board here, but I was also sent digital pictures where I was able to zoom and show that the mouth was completely up against the board and zoom in on the tail so we could read it. So it's, if you don't have the specific zooms, it's possible, you know, send me digital ones. As long as I can tell and we can see the full length of the fish on the board, it's still fine if you don't have the specific subset of pictures. Because if you think about it, a lot of people will just zoom in and take a crop of the tail and zoom in, take a crop of the head. As long as we can clearly tell, it's okay. You have your line sample here from that record. So I have, it was 30-pound test, high seas diamond, with 6-foot fluorocarbon and a bead on there. And I believe he was using a planer board, which he was able to cut off. As long as it released once the fish took, it's legal, which it did. So he was able to cut that off and keep it. I have the application here and his application information, all that's in there. So that's one example of an all tackle length here, which became extremely popular when I posted that picture on social media. We got a wave of people. I think we sold out of measuring devices for the brief time pretty quickly after that. But here's another cool one. This is all tackle length Arctic char.
Wow.
So it's beautiful fish. It's not a thick fish, so weight wise, you know, it might not be a record, but you can tell it's long. You have picture on the device right here, and you have what you need, picture the close-up of the head against the board, close-up of the tail so we can measure the fork length, and then you have your rod and reel used right there. So you have all your requirements, including the line sample, and this was caught on the Vibrax Blue Fox spinner. So was able to cut the spinner off and keep it. And with that application, that's all you need. So it's pretty simple, you know. It doesn't have to be a hard process, and you can do it quickly, efficiently, and protect the fish and still get a world record.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, there are a lot of other opportunities with the IGFA, and I really look forward to going through a lot of them with you over time. I mean, everything from line class, you know, there's all tackle, there's line class, there's fly, there's all of the tippet within that, but there's also grand slams, royal slam.
Yep.
And the lifetime is
The lifetime's the Royal Slam, so popular on the Billfish Royal Slam, catching all 9 of the major billfish species, or, you know, it doesn't matter what species of spearfish as long as you get one of those, a swordfish, Pacific and Atlantic blue marlin, black marlin, Pacific and Atlantic sailfish, and white marlin, and I think that's all of them I got.
Yeah. I mean, but it's just something that,
Yeah.
I mean, the bill fishing is bill fishing. It is an expensive sport. You're not doing it from the beach, but they're the inshore slams. There's so many opportunities for you know, any angler anywhere in the country.
We just saw at the end of the summer is usually the culmination of a bunch of trout Grand Slam applications that I get from the Midwest. So you got your cutthroats, your browns, your rainbows, your brooks. So we have trout Grand Slam options. We have bass Grand Slam options. They don't have to be huge fish. I just got an application for a bass Grand Slam from a kid in, I think it was Virginia. And each fish was probably no more than 6 inches in length, but it was a largemouth, a smallmouth, and a spotted bass. It was one of the smallest ones I saw, but it was a kid, and he was thrilled, and it's a great thing to provide those opportunities for people.
Fantastic. Well, I really can't thank you enough for taking the time, spend with us, take a little bit of mystery out of the IGFA and records. I really look forward to, continuing the conversation as we really go forward. And it's great stuff for folks to focus on over the winter as you make your boards and get restocked. And
have a big order coming in hopefully pretty soon. And, there might be some changes to the category, but I can guarantee you there'll be some more opportunities in the future. Records will continue to evolve, and we're going to do our best to make sure there's opportunities for everyone out there.
Fantastic. Nick Haddad, again, thank you. Thank you for spending the time with us.
For having me.